Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. And in this episode, we're going to discuss John Wilkes Booth. Is he a hero or is he a villain? But who is John Wilkes Booth, you might be asking? Well, these days you'll hear responses like villain, murderer, and an assassin. But if you had asked that same question before the terrible events of April 14th, 1865, you would have gotten a very different answer. As the heir of a well-known acting family and one of the biggest performers in American theater, Booth was born in Bel Air, Maryland, and was charming and very handsome. Born to his renowned father, Junius Brutus Booth, ironically named after the Roman senator who killed Julius Caesar, John Wilkes Booth was the ninth of 10 children. Considered by many to be the best tragic actor of the first half of the 1800s, Junius Booth is a member of the American Theater Hall of Fame. People all over the world knew his name and his face. Booth's older brother Edwin, who is also in the Acting Hall of Fame, is regarded as the finest Shakespearean actor of the second half of the century. Much like Booth's father was regarded as the greatest actor of the 19th century. In yet another strange turn of events, Edwin Booth even saved the life of Robert Todd Lincoln from getting run over by a train. Robert Lincoln later wrote of this account. Upon turning to thank my rescuer, I saw it was Edwin Booth, whose face was of course well known to me, and I expressed my gratitude to him, and in doing so called him by name. Lincoln was not only relieved to be rescued from an approaching train at the time, but he was also taken aback by the experience. However, John Wilkes Booth's well-known family did not overwhelm him. He came from an A-list family and was an A-list actor. He was described as a veritable sensation by the New York Herald. He was regarded by critics as a dark star, the ideal villain, and the epitome of Richard III. His trickster-like sneer, satanic stare, and a pity-murdering chuckle, according to a critic for the Spirit of the Times, quite curdle the blood and haunt one like specters of a dream. The critic referred to him as another Lucifer. According to John Wilkes Booth, he quoted, "I am determined to be a villain," he boasted to the New York Herald. Unfortunately for the country, Booth was unable to separate his stage image from his personal life. Perhaps bored in between shows, Booth joined a group called the Know-Nothings, a political party that strongly opposed immigration and was anti-Catholic. In addition to burning churches and engaging in riots, the Know-Nothings also tarred and feathered Catholic priests. Booth's allegiances were firmly with the South when the Civil War broke out, and it is thought that he worked as a Confederate Secret Service operative. Booth, while a young man, went to fortune tellers to find out his destiny, if it would be one of fame, fortune, and following in the family business in the Acting Hall of Fame. Booth met a Romany gypsy, and she told John Wilkes Booth this. He was destined for a short and troubled life, emphasizing he would die young and leave many to mourn him. Booth took this telling to heart and even told his sister about it. While on the run, Booth would often mention the telling after shooting the president multiple times in his diary. Booth, also as a young child, was given a poem by his mother for his birthday, and she had a vision of her son and wrote this poem. Tiny, innocent, white baby hand, what force, what power is at your command, for evil or for good? Booth, while on the run, later rethought of his mother's poem and her vision, and thought that he carried out what she stated. Booth first intended to kidnap the president. Whether or not he was an agent with the Confederacy was another story, with the hope that he might actually return Mr. Lincoln to the federal government in exchange for the release of all Southern prisoners of war. However, chance and possibly the scheme of some evil force caused Booth to turn to murder after his effort to capture the president failed. On April 11, 1865, Booth attended Lincoln's speech at the White House. Lincoln wanted to give Africans and newly freed slaves citizenship and change new laws. Booth replied to Lewis Powell, a conspirator, and stated, "That means N-word hard R, citizenship. Now by God, I'll put him through. That is the last speech he will ever make." When Booth was picking up his mail at Ford's Theater on the morning of Friday, April 14, 1865, he learned that the president was scheduled to see the popular play of the day, Our American Cousin, that very evening. Booth had a very personal vendetta against Lincoln. People often stated when someone mentioned the name Lincoln to Booth, his eyes darkened, and he would go ballistic, using slurs and attacking Lincoln in a verbal rage. When Richmond was lost and the Confederacy was dying, Edwin Booth, John's brother, stated John would get drunk every day and mourn Richmond and the Confederacy as if it were a real person. With the loss of the Confederacy, the plan to exchange prisoners was no longer needed. John Wilkes Booth turned his anger and his obsession to assassination. Booth and his group of conspirators began their plan to assassinate the president and to decapitate the American government after, again, the kidnapping plan failed. Booth decided it was now the time to act. Booth, in his distorted sense of duty and his conceited assumption that he was a hero, a tool of some divine power, he recruited an ex-Confederate soldier named Lewis Powell, who was assigned to kill Secretary of State William Seward. Vice President Andrew Johnson's murder was attributed to George Atzerodt. Booth kept the assignment of killing the great emancipator for himself. Tragically, Booth would be the only one to succeed. Even though Powell was unable to kill Seward, and then Atzerodt lost his confidence, partying and getting drunk rather than carrying out his part in the plan. The other members prepared their events and escapes and their own unique parts to play. John Wilkes Booth, being a famous actor, acted at Ford's Theater hundreds of times, and it was literally almost a second home to him. John knew the layout. He entered the backstage door and gave his horse to another accomplice. Booth walked to the edge of the stage and then peeked through the curtains and saw Lincoln was in his box. He went under the stage and popped out the other side, and then went to a bar next door called the Star Saloon for liquid courage. Now, in political society during the 18th century, and even for hundreds of years prior, if you actually believed a political leader to be corrupt or tyrannical, it was actually your right to kill that tyrant. Booth acted hundreds of times as the character of Brutus, who aided in assassinating Julius Caesar, who again was believed to be a tyrant. Brutus was hailed as some hero by some, but eventually killed himself when his army and his fellow assassins all were killed or imprisoned. Booth saw himself as the Brutus of the United States and wanted to end the tyrant Lincoln in the only way he knew how, in a theatrical fashion. Booth believed what he was doing and what he did was right. So when he killed the president, he thought himself to be a hero. John Wilkes Booth walked to President Abraham Lincoln's private box on the evening of April 14th. Even if the president's bodyguard had been present, he probably would have let Booth, a well-known actor, in. However, he had left his station and was actually spending the night drinking in the same bar next door that John Wilkes Booth was drinking at. Booth, hearing this, went back inside and went up the stairs and proceeded to open the door to a small hallway. Secured the door behind him, walked to the yellow door, and looked through the keyhole, and saw the back of Lincoln's head. Booth waited for a certain line of the play to be uttered. He opened the door quietly, pulled out his pistol, and shot Lincoln in the back of his head. Booth then attacked Major Henry Rathbone and jumped onto the stage. No one knows for sure, but Booth broke his leg. It is unknown if his spur on his boot caught the American flag as he fell wrong, or other theories are that Major Rathbone grabbed Booth's leg as he fell down, or did Booth land on his leg wrong, breaking it? No one knows. Even Booth himself wrote down many different theories on how he could have broken it. He often wrote, his horse fell on his leg, breaking it. But eventually Booth wrote in his diary on the run that he must have broken his leg leaping onto the stage. Booth moved to the center of the stage and held a bloody dagger in his hand above his head and shouted the Virginia state motto, Sic semper tyrannis, which means thus always to tyrants. Perhaps more significantly to Booth, these words were the exact words his father's namesake said when he stabbed Julius Caesar. Booth then proceeded to flee Fort Cedar and escaped into Maryland, where Confederate sympathizers hid him in a pine thicket on the edge of a swamp. Booth had been sure he would be hailed as a hero. He eagerly awaited for news and was excited to see his name and photos in the paper.
I'm a symbol.
Booth believed he was a symbol, but he soon realized he was not hailed as a hero, but as a coward. The truth of what he had done actually haunted him. The Confederacy failed to resurrect. Rather, in honor of the deceased president, church bells rang throughout the countryside on Easter Sunday, April 16th, both in the North and in the South. President Lincoln is still remembered today as a world hero, the great emancipator, and possibly our greatest president. All that is known about John Wilkes Booth is that he was a world-famous actor who then turned into America's first presidential assassin overnight. Booth was on the run for 12 days with a fellow accomplice, David Harold. The two men would try to reach the South in hopes for the war to start again and for Booth to be welcomed as a hero. Booth often wrote in his diary,
after being hunted like a dog through swamps, woods, and last night being chased till I was forced to return wet, cold, and starving, with every man's hand against me, I am here in despair. And why? For doing what Brutus was honored for, what made Tell a hero, and yet I, for striking down a greater tyrant than they ever knew, am looked upon as a common cutthroat. I desire to return to Washington and, in a measure, clear my name, which I feel I can do.
Instead, he was killed by Union cavalry in a tobacco barn, hunted like a dog or a common criminal. Booth was to be buried in the family plot, but left unmarked, and forever stained with the reputation of being America's first presidential assassin. Well, that's it for the episode. Stay tuned for a few different videos on the Lincoln assassination and the Lincoln conspiracy theories, along with the conspirators. Who were they? How did Booth recruit them? All those are coming out soon. But again, please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think about John Wilkes Booth? Was he a hero? Was he a villain? Was he misunderstood? What do you think of Booth and his actions with the assassination? Please watch the video here, and please watch my playlists over here. And I'll see you all in the next episode.